Ashish, we are live.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and good evening, Mr. Dilip Chenoy. It is my proud privilege to welcome you on the 42nd episode of Coffee with Ashish. And for all my viewers, we have the Secretary General of FICCI here with us today. And we're going to get into a conversation to see what the shape of the travel and tourism industry looks like going ahead, what has been happening during the COVID times, and what, of course, are the strategies of FICCI taking it forward. And we are going to particularly concentrate on travel and tourism and hospitality segment, although FICCI covers the whole gamut. I also have overseas audience, although FICCI does not need introduction, but I will just give a background of FICCI before I come to Mr. Dilip Chenoy. FICCI is known as the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and it's the largest and the oldest organization which was established in 1927. It's a non-government, not-for-profit organization, and is the voice of India's business industry. Its own role spans from influencing policy to encouraging debates, engaging with policymakers, civil society, and FICCI articulates the views and concerns of the industry. And in this case, we are talking specifically on travel, tourism, and hospitality. Viewers would also probably like to know that FICCI is one of the first federations to have adopted technology way ahead of its time, with its own virtual platform for business information, knowledge, and education, which was called BIKE, B-I-K-E. But having said that, I'll share a little anecdote while I go along, that even in the travel technology segment, where I have been actively involved for the past 5 years with FICCI, it was the first one to have hosted a travel technology digital conclave, which then later went on to set up his own committee of travel technology, realizing that the growth of e-commerce and travel was headed in the manner of travel technology and digitalization, which we today, during the times of pandemic, have well come to realize the role of technology in all we do. It has a very large spread, FICCI. It has almost 70 specialized committees, task force. It has offices in 18 states and, mind you, 7 countries overseas, with over 200 MOUs, I'm told, across various verticals. So with that, I welcome again Mr. Dilip Chenoy. He himself is currently the Secretary General of FICCI, and he leads the permanent secretariat. He's a change leader himself, and during these unprecedented time, and I am a witness to that, he has remodeled the functioning of FICCI, and I've seen it with my own experience as I go on. Under his leadership and support, the travel and tourism team, he has taken a lead during the crisis to support the industry in taking up the cause with various states, government, and launched many new initiatives, including the 2-day tourism e-conclave, which some of my viewers might have attended to. Prior to, of course, his current stint with FICCI, he was the managing director of National Skill Development Center, a public-private partnership to develop an ecosystem for skill development in India. So no better person at this stage of crisis to head FICCI and take us further. With that, I welcome you, Mr. Dilip Chenoy.
Thank you, Ashish. This is kind of a flipped classroom. It's normally the secretariat that interviews and asks office bearers for views, and you actually flipped this one very nicely onto me. But anyway, I'll try and live up to your expectations.
No, I think I'm going to enjoy it, and I'm sure my viewers as far as the viewers are concerned, we might have an assortment of viewers, not only in the travel and tourism industry in India, but we are connected to a platform known as Buzz Platform, which is a very European and American community of travel fraternity across. So you might have some audience listening in there. So let's just deep dive straight into a little conversation with you. And the last few months have been turbulent, to say the least. You know, the viewers will wish to hear from you personally the role played by FICCI in the travel and tourism segment. So you might like to articulate what's been happening so far.
Thank you, Ashish, for that. You know, actually, if you look at the Indian context, FICCI's work in addressing the COVID pandemic actually started in February.
Right.
And while the official lockdown was announced on the 22nd, of March.
Right.
We actually had a meeting with the tourism minister on the 19th of March,
Hmm.
a physical meeting in his office, and saying there seems to be a problem in the tourism industry. At that time, there was this, China was the epicenter, Wuhan was the epicenter.
Hmm.
And we said that, we need a kind of a roadmap for the tourism industry going forward. Little did we know that 2 days or 3 days later, or 4 days later, there would be Janta curfew and then a lockdown.
Right.
And during the lockdown, I think the first set of recommendations that we actually made, because the tourism sector, and by tourism, we must understand it is from the guide at a monument or a museum, right, to the transport operator, to the tour operator, the inbound, the outbound, the restaurant, the hotel, the bars, and the airlines.
Yes.
The whole gamut of the tourism industry and everyone connected to this is a huge thing.
Yes.
So to look at all of these sectors and actually present their views was a Herculean task. And we have the chairperson, Dr. Josna Suri, who has actually led from the front, and you have been part of the core team that has been leading from the front. But in the interest of viewers, what we actually did was we quickly had a co-group meeting, a committee meeting, and said, what are the issues? So among the first recommendations that FICCI put out for this sector was, can we think of a fund or a loan to this sector that will enable them to pay wages?
Right.
While that was not accepted in its entirety, but for those firms, and since a lot of these firms were, employing less than 100 people, significant part of them got less than the, a ceiling of 15 to 20,000 rupees, right? For them, a kind of government came in with an intervention and to allow them to actually happen.
Right.
The second thing which the sector required, in which we worked with the government, was on this moratorium on loan repayments, because a lot of different sectors were due. And then we started a series with the different state governments. So we used to interact with the tourism minister of the state or the tourism secretary of the state, Rajasthan, Kerala, Chhattisgarh. You take Madhya Pradesh, which is the last one, which we did just a few days ago, because a lot of the challenges were local, whether it is electricity taxes or whether it is licenses or rent or whole sort of thing. So we went to each and every state to say that, can you develop a package to actually help and address the short-term payments? And we actually coined a kind of a 3-stage recovery process, which you were very part of, which was, first thing is, let's survive.
Survive, yeah, that's right.
Let's get through this. And I think with the opening up being done in phases across the country, a lot of the industry, a lot of us are in the survival phase. Then comes revival,
Right.
and then comes thrive. Right. And a lot of the revival and thrive actions have to be taken now. So that has been our agenda with the different state governments, what is to do. So we to just make it in 3 quick points so that we can go to the next thing is, one, we developed a set of recommendations that the center could do to assist the travel and tourism industry, including reopening of hotels and restaurants and all of that, and creating the standard operating procedures, etc., etc. The second is work at the state level, right, to ensure that the states work in tandem with the center on actually enabling the whole survival and revival kind of thing. And third, what are the other sectors that could actually influence them? Can we get them open, right? Can we open internal travel?
Sure.
Right. And, for example, the tourism minister announced the opening up of the monuments to the film industry for filming. So when they come in, then, people will come in, there will be some movement, there will be some requirement of travel, ticketing, etc., etc. So it is a 3-pronged strategy that we took. And also, we studied a lot of the systems which countries overseas did. So, August being the holiday season in Europe, a lot of European countries actually opened up travel because they did not want the tourist season to go waste, right?
Right,
And we
right.
took the learnings from that, etc., and going forward. So it's a multi-pronged approach. And of course, there's a great leadership within FICCI there, which enabled us to take this forward.
Right. Talking about learnings of various countries, I mean, they're very well articulated in a report which FICCI and Grant Thornton produced, which is well documented. And of course, it brought in a lot of recommendations to both the private and the government sectors in terms of revival and strategies and policy changes, etc. And here I must again, Mr. Chenoy, add, being party to some of these webinars where state governments have been involved, and the ones you mentioned, and they have been particularly, and FICCI has been particularly inclusive in carrying the leadership across and all stakeholders. You talked about the guide, you talked about every smallest denomination consisting of tourism. But I've seen in FICCI that FICCI has carried a very inclusive platform where you've had association heads, where you've had all the states involved. I've seen Orissa, Uttarakhand, UP. I mean, the list is endless. I veto very much the role played by FICCI in these times. But what is next? I mean, what's the future strategy going forward?
So we are in a very interesting situation around the country. We have, uh, you know, many sectors of the tourism industry that are opening up. Travel and tourism industry, hotels are being opened up. Yet banquets have not been opened up yet, and going forward, functions of up to 100 people will be allowed, right? So going forward, there are again three broad aspects. The first is, how can we identify the tools and the different methodologies that will enable the industry and different segments to be able to start into the next phase of survival. So you survived a closed scenario. Now, how do you survive a gradually opening scenario? How do you then look at the thriving, what you need to do? And in this, there are two aspects. One is what the industry needs to do, and the second is what governments could do. The governments have been focusing on the supply side. So FICCI is saying, let's look at the demand side now. There's a need to look at demand side going forward.
Right.
And third is, what is the future of? So how will this sector look at, and what parts of the old do we want to incorporate in the new normal, and what new things will come in the new normal, and how do we actually do that? So for example, there are some countries which have done an advertisement campaign.
Right.
And what is interesting in that advertisement campaign, take for example, Egypt, for one example, actually the people there in that campaign are wearing masks.
Yeah.
Which is a totally different kind of a scenario.
Yeah, message.
Or if you look at the campaign which Thailand is doing about how Thailand is welcome for tourists. So at a national level and then at the state level, how do we promote tourism? There's a lot of discussion that there'll be staycations or stayvacations or whatever it is, that people will travel locally and drive through. How do you enable that to actually happen, and how do we position things differently? The third aspect of it, a lot of it will go digitalist and contactless. So how are companies actually, enabling a lot of new technology to come into their existing infrastructure? And a lot of things that we took for granted. For example, on a door, we will think that the push and pull is going to go into history. So it's going to be automated doors, going to have a different signage, everything, paperless tickets. And you're seeing all of that happening. How does the airline industry actually impact? How does travel impact, et cetera, et cetera. So what do the technology changes need to actually happen? And then if this time is going to be taken by different people in the tourism industry to reinvent themselves, is it now time for a special package or a special funding or a fund for the tourism industry to be able to leverage at low interest rates or differential interest rates with longer moratoriums, longer payback period, so that we can take this survival and thrive and accelerate the thrive phase, so that we can go forward where the states and the center actually have a huge campaign to promote the industry, and we can get going the entire travel by train, by bus, by air, both. And obviously, we're also talking about specific air bubbles between certain countries and cities. So we can have two-way tourism in those air bubbles. So there are multiple things happening, but like in the three categories: one, industry agenda,
Right.
what we can do; two, the central government agenda; and three, the state government agenda, with a very, very simple thing: can we transform this? And when you opened, you talked about the early initiatives that we took in digital
Right.
tourism, but a lot of the thing is going to be around experiences, and it's not only going to be physical; it's going to be physical plus digital.
Right.
The digital experience and tourism, the more we can bring that into the tourism sector, it will be a very different experience for this. But the number one thing is positioning tourism or travel and tourism as a safe, non-COVID attracting kind of an activity, and it is going to give you a pleasurable experience going forward.
I agree with you. But, one of the things which has always confronted the travel industry, and for one, which I have been a part of, is that it's a hugely unorganized, very fragmented industry. So therefore, to be able to adapt a certain kind of specifications across becomes more and more difficult. So while we do that, obviously at this time when everything has come down to ground, so to say, the need for policy reforms, need for strategies, making a proper blueprint for travel and tourism in a total perspective is increasingly more and more important. A little example is if you look at IRCTC, and I'm very fond of quoting this, pre-COVID, there were 23 million railway seats, reserved and unreserved, to be available to be sold. Out of which only 10% of them were automated on IRCTC platform. The balance were to be purchased at the counter, etc., etc. So whereas we take care of the demand and the supply side, but I shudder to think how these will be delivered to the end consumer. If you look at the state transport, again, you have huge bus inventory of huge transport just waiting to be digitalized. But coming back to policy and adaptation of changing of certain strategic policies, what would be your view? One little example to just nudge that discussion is that I personally didn't realize in aviation that I was taking a flight from Delhi to Bombay, which actually was taking me 30 minutes longer than it would have. It's only when this policy reform came in that you could take a shorter airspace. I didn't realize it, being in the industry for so long. I did. So I believe there are many such reforms waiting to happen. What are your views on those reforms?
So I think the first thing is that, pre-COVID, it was the CEO or the CTO or someone else who decided what the digital strategy of a company in this space would be.
Right.
And there would be committees formed which will look at cost reduction and optimization and policy changes. During COVID and currently, it is COVID which is driving digital transformation. And here the difference is, in a committee, you can always go back to the board and you seem to have time. Here, to be able to survive and thrive, you've got to do everything like yesterday. And suddenly you realize that the only block is yourself, right? There is no block.
Yeah.
If you want to transform your business, right, you can actually do it overnight, and you need to prioritize and set about it, right? And what is happening is the government's digital experience has been dramatically changed. If you look at it, a lot of what the paperwork in the aviation sector that is required is actually happening digitally. And also, where you required a boarding pass and you required it to be stamped and you required all sorts of, all that is now gone. It's all digital, right?
Look at the metro, which just announced
Yeah.
the card. Yeah.
Okay. So the digital transformation is going to happen whether you like it or not, and it's just got accelerated because of COVID. And when people find that it's more relevant, right, going forward, you'll see that accelerate. Similarly, in the IRCTC on the railways and all, they will changing that software is not a big thing. It's just the mindset that is required, right? So there's some, there might be initial lethargy, or why change it? It's going back, we're going to go back to the normal. There's no social distancing. Every birth can be sold, etc., etc., etc. But it'll change, right? And that change is going to happen in a very, very important manner. But the three things, right, that this industry needs at this point of time, the first one is liquidity.
Mm.
Right? And they need liquidity. They're those within the banking sector. They need a restructuring of loans. They need additional loans, etc. A lot of the people here, they might have a bank account, but may not have a bank loan,
Mm.
and therefore they may not have access to capital there. So we need to actually understand that they get access to capital and things like that. The second thing, what they actually need to while go forward is this whole support from the states. You know, can we look at it is very interesting when the states wanted revenue, they opened the sale of liquor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bars are not yet allowed to function.
Mm.
Okay, so I think at some point of time we need to actually look at it in a different manner going forward. And then we have to actually flip the whole future on its head, because tourism before COVID is not necessarily tourism post COVID. And this is something which the industry needs to actually understand, which the states need to understand, of how do you create experiences and create a thing which goes beyond just going and visiting a place and then coming and sitting in your hotel and doing something. So people will look at shorter vacations, more secure and safe vacations, and more simulating and stimulating vacations. It's not the whole thing, because I think this is what the industry and the whole sector needs to gear up going forward. And while the government has an agenda, I believe that whichever part of the value chain you are in the tourism sector, or which type of stakeholder you are, there is an agenda which you need to drive. And how do you cut costs? How do you create a greater customer engagement? How do you create, a general, how do you exceed the experience perceived by the customer? And a lot of it means that you need to develop digital capabilities and add on to the customer's physical experience. So I think going forward, tourism, the expectation of a customer from the tourism sector would be more. Initially it was, if you went and you did a 40-second episode, and 42nd Street in New York is known for theater.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And a lot of the musicals there, which you paid the hundreds of dollars to actually enter, were available free online. And how do you actually generate, if I'm in New York, what is the free thing that we can actually look, and instead of looking at a phone or a screen, how do you connect it to the TV in the hotel room? So the TVs in the hotel rooms would need to be different. You would need different gadgetry inside. The whole thing is beyond imagination. I mean, and the more you think about it in your own thing, and how you can enrich the experience, the more competitive, the more useful you would be, and your business would really thrive. So it's not business as usual; it's very business as unusual in the new normal.
Yeah. So I'll take on to your word about customer engagement, and I'll also pick up on the funding and the investment. Prior to COVID, of course, the term was customer acquisition, and it was acquisition at any cost. So you saw huge amount of investments coming in the online industry, even offline, where 70% of the funds I know actually went towards customer acquisitions, be it in deep discounting, be it in marketing, be it in reach out, etc., etc. And price was the only factor. You acquired a customer because you drove him into the price pyramid. But having said that, now post-COVID, obviously funds not being so easy, etc. And that's my discussion with CEOs of even the online industry. And they're not shying away from the fact that we got to look at our balance sheets now more than just acquiring customers, and customer engagement and the experience being far more important than just acquiring customer for the sake of us. So, I mean, you resonate very rightly when you put an overall perspective. Do you see it that way?
I think just to say that, the customer acquisition of the prospective supplier of a service reaching out to a prospective user has actually been flipped on its head. And if you look at all the disruptions if you look at even the hotel websites and the comparative websites and, the experiential websites, and, I think there's a community which is actually forming, which will reward those who are good performing. And, the focus on reaching out to a customer through direct mailers, through emails, through contacts, through different things is one aspect. But the other aspect, where the customer comes to you because of what in the old days without we used to call word of mouth, is by virtue of your digital acceptance and your digital acknowledgement and the digital awareness that you have created, is going to drive your business going forward. And it's all going to be convenience based. And the greater convenience and the greater flexibility. So I think cancellations, and all of that is not going to work. So, people are going to say in uncertain times, how can I be certain of certain things going forward? And that digital presence and digital awareness will principally drive it. But at the same time, given that a lot of people are not necessarily on a computer, it has to be device driven, and not necessarily, and maybe and a feature phone enabled. So there's a creating up of technology and the dumbing down of technology to be able to reach this thing. So your market segmentation, your customer segmentation, your customer identification, using data analytics and using machine learning to be able to predict, right, where a person could go, and then giving them options even before they ask, would possibly be a kind of a dream for anybody who's looking at vacation. Wow, how did this guy know I was going to think about going to, let's say, since we were talking to Madhya Pradesh tourism yesterday, Khajuraho, or thinking of going to Udaipur, or thinking of going, to Kovalam, whatever it is. So that is actually this thing of where you can say, okay, guys, you went for your vacation to these places, but these are similar places, somewhat like Netflix does. Or someone else does. So I think that whole experience is going to change, and the companies and the organizations that get on top of it will find it easier to acquire customers, and customers will gravitate towards them.
So while I'm hearing you, I'm almost hearing an emotional connect with you. And of course, your stint with skill development and having set up a government-private partnership program, which was pretty successful. In my own ways, I do believe that as far as data management and mining of data, protection of data, and data consumption in various forms, I think there needs to be perhaps some kind of, for the travel and tourism industry, a private partnership and public partnership coming in, because not all travel companies can put their minds together to make one platform which works for all. Do you see any thoughts there in that direction?
I think skilling and reskilling is hugely required. But if I will take about the travel and tourism industry, if we include restaurants in it, okay, you have in the COVID era the ability in 1.3 billion people in India, I think 30% or 20% or X% of them must have filmed themselves actually preparing a food item and shared it through a WhatsApp group or something, or on the net,
correct.
right? Now
TikTok videos, yes.
imagine if you had the ability to
Yeah.
look at that, to evaluate them and identify the next 30 or 300 or 3,000 chefs who would be change the future of your restaurant, right?
Mm.
Now, you don't have anybody in your organization currently who can do that.
Do that, correct.
So we have to identify the skills of the future, what is required, identify the job roles. And, there is a tourism and hospitality sector skill council. Mr. Bahadur, leads it, has a chair and, is set up under NSCC. We got to get the new job descriptions there, the qualification packs, start, populating them. And what's going to happen is that this is not going to be a 240-hour classroom kind of scenario. It's going to be physical plus digital, and it's going to be micro credits and other things. So imagine if when your number 2 or 3 or 4 people in a restaurant or the front desk were not available. Now you can actually do videos of training and they can access it online. So the training costs may dramatically reduce. The training methodologies may dramatically change going
Correct.
forward.
Correct.
And you can get online certification. Now, you're going to have AR and VR going to come into digital platforms. So you can do multiple things there and it's at very low cost.
Yeah, yeah.
And the interesting part of the tourism industry is because it's assured of a job, right? So where you have a lot of circuit of salespeople in different things, currently there's a shortage. And there's a shortage because we don't have adequately trained people. So we got to build an ecosystem where we can identify these people and they're available. Talent is available. We've been unable to identify them around the world, and it's very interesting. And I think this is going to be the next frontier in skilling and developing human capability in the tourism industry across the world.
Well, we hope this COVID accelerates that thinking in that direction too. But talking about ecosystem out there, I come back to ecotourism. And a lot of my guests who have appeared on episodes earlier have spoken very vehemently about sustainable tourism, ecotourism, and saying that now that everything has stopped, perhaps it's time for the government, perhaps it's time for the tour operators, perhaps it's the time for people who promote tourism within the country, outside the country. I've talked to even people who are large brands overseas like Trafalgar, Insight Vacations, etc., who say that, what we do is we as a company make special mention to make sure that we invest certain amount of our monies into activities where we keep the area sanitized and clean, and we make sure that our tourists don't throw their junk in where they should not be throwing, etc. I think India somewhere, and that's where my guests have said, need to now build a more sustainable blueprint for tourism now that is reviving. And can we stop that muck to be floating on the beaches or plastic bottles to be rolling down the hillside? And FICCI works very strongly, I know, in the CSR activities. And I must not fail to mention that I've been also advocating that at least the travel and tourism companies, the aviation companies, and people who have to spend that mandatory monies into CSR activity, perhaps government should come out and keep a certain percentage of that identified only for tourism projects, to keep your monuments swatch, to keep your hillside clean and so on. How would you react to that overall thought?
So, one of the very positive impacts of COVID is the sudden realization of what people were missing.
Yeah.
So if you see some of the posts that initially came up, people said, oh, we can see a blue sky. Or we see, peacocks, or we see nilgai, or, we've seen different type of wildlife species coming into areas that we claim.
Or mountains from Pathankot itself.
Or you suddenly see a scenery which you could not. And these memories are current. And if you see that, okay, the pollution levels in rivers has gone down, you're seeing greater fish, you're seeing greater activity, you're seeing cleaner air. So I think what is going to happen is that there is going to be a huge push to retain as much of this going forward. And I think as companies, you have companies in India, for example, who who actually are water positive, are carbon positive,
Positive, yeah.
are doing a lot of good stuff there. You have eco tourist chains there, large, small, small, in very crowded areas, you suddenly have a boutique area which is eco, and these are the areas that are being patronized by more and more customers. And as the customers get more demanding, it's there. On another note, I think very recently we are looking at green finance. And green finance might be a cheaper option than the other finance, and you might actually find it a viable option to look at eco tourism and sustainability of that going forward. The only challenge in India, and this is something which we actually have to look at, is that once a tourist spot gets popular, right? And you actually not only, you also had it in Venice and other parts where there's a huge surge of people going there, and the number of people visiting there is not, it cannot be sustained by the existing habitat. So you will actually have to do both the control of the numbers which are going there. That may drive up the prices, or you might have extra things. It's like, for example, on the Taj, you have to take the electric bus and things going forward.
Correct.
This is definitely a part of the future. A lot of people and a lot of people around the world are looking at saying, how can we, continue to have the clean green skies and blue skies and the greenery all around us and the rivers floating. So it's going to come, and the faster the industry adopts this, you know, you already had initial things taken. You change your sheets every alternate day or once in 3 days. Place your towel on the rack. Those are things, but we got to think deeper. We got to eliminate packaging. We got to eliminate. So COVID has actually led to a lot of that, because take home, take away has got much less disposable stuff, which will become the new normal. And you'll find different types of cutlery, crockery. All that will actually happen, which is going forward.
So lastly, of course, I have over the last 4 or 5 years paid pretty much attention to startups in the travel tourism industry, and what sort of not bothers me, whereas I see a lot of activity happening towards government supporting startups and being advocated, but they have been successful startups in travel tourism, but they don't come to limelight. So the programs of travel and tourism is just like the industry itself. It's not, so you'll find the manufacturing industry getting a lot of heads up on startup. You'll get other activities. How can we push forth travel and tourism as a rightful phase? For example, I'll give you an example. I know of a startup who is actually specializing on this railway automation, as we are talking about it. Why shouldn't the government be coming forward and say, we are prepared to support you both financially and otherwise to take an initiative forward? Why only manufacturing and others?
FICCI has a very strong program on supporting startups, either through a global innovation program or the Millennium Alliance, or we recently did a COVID challenge, which is not necessarily on health, which is on everything. So FICCI itself is advocating the funding and support of startups. I think the biggest challenge here is that the startups are not being able to integrate with the
mainstream,
and because they're seen as disruptors, they're seen as competitors. And if you look at even the tourism sector, and if I have to talk of some of the well-known disputes there, aggregators of rooms are seen as competitors.
Right.
And you want to, you don't actually see how it actually benefits you. You see aggregator of airline seats and selling airline seats or bus seats as competitors, and you want to actually think that you are giving more value to them, and you can replicate the same thing in your company and create it. But the startups will keep on disrupting. Their way is to look at disruption and to see how they can give greater value to the customer, whether it's information or whether there's access or whether it's the ease of booking, the ease of using, and the ease of refund or a lower cost. Now, a company cannot actually do that. So the companies are following two strategies. Some are trying to acquire a startup and get it be part of them.
Get
Some
kickstart on it.
some are funding startups so that they can actually be be a part of them. And I think there will be a time, and maybe when we get together next time in the tourism committee, we need to actually have and get and interact with startups to see how we can actually facilitate and work with them, and to see
Right.
how we can dramatically change the
Their
whole
mindset.
system.
Yeah.
The mindset, how instead of competing, how do we collaborate? I mean,
Collaborate. Yeah.
collaboration is the next form of
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And by competing, you divide four by two people, and you get two each. By collaborating, you take two each and make it 22.
Agree with you entirely.
So
No,
it's a different way of.
you very wisely said that all these guys were with the buzzword of disrupting. The moment you use the word disrupting, you're taken as a competitor. So, I mean, yes, let's collaborate together would be the new norm, hopefully going forward. Um, and having said that, I see that travel and tourism seems to be in a very strong leadership in your hands in FICCI. I must also, having been working closely, very appreciative of the travel tourism team you have within FICCI, led by Manish Ahuja at this stage, Anirban, Samantha. All of them have stood the test of time as far as I'm concerned personally. And I see with your leadership and guidance, I think there's a lot more which can be done going forward.
Yeah, Ashish, like I said in the beginning, this is a kind of a flipped interview. And my role is really to enable, whether it's Manish or you took Samanda or Anirban, you took the names of people. They work with you, right? And they develop the agenda. I'm there just to facilitate and do this. So I greatly appreciate your leadership, leadership of Dr. Suri, the co-chairs. We have chairmen in most of the states, also the whether it is the state tourism secretaries or the state tourism minister or Mr. Prahlad Singh Patel here, and I believe it's time for the global tourism ministers to get together to actually have a chat, and now it can be done virtually. You don't have to travel anywhere.
Yes, absolutely. Sure.
Right? And we can have regional sessions, we can have global sessions to see how we can bring back a little bit of tour in everybody's life.
So I conclude with a statement, as they say, that it's strong to stand for yourself, but it is stronger if you stand for others. And I think you and FICCI have been standing for the cause of the industry across all industries, of course, especially travel. So with that, I'd like to thank you for having that coffee with me and appearing on the show today. And I look forward to more engagements in the future.
Thank you, Ashish. And I hope you can add a 4 zeros to the 40 seconds. So sometime we'll be listening to the 4,200th episode of your show. All the very best, and keep smiling.
Thank you.
Thank you, viewers, for listening in. We greatly appreciate your support.
All
and
right.
just take a holiday or take a travel in the next 1 month. That will be your greatest contribution to this industry going forward.
On that. Thank you. Bye-bye.